W.F. House presents an unabridged recording of Pride and Prejudices, Queer Lives in the Law by Keio Yoshida, narrated by Keio Yoshida. Gay is the word, a note from the author on language. Language is important, and it is also constantly shifting. It varies between generations and across cultures and continents. I have tried my best to be sensitive to this, but at times I use terms that are antiquated or offensive. Often this is because they are technical legal terms, as set out in legislation or legal judgments. Terms such as sodomy, buggery, and homosexuality are still used in legal systems around the world. This is the direct result of the legacy of British colonialism. It is important to reflect this history and reality. In this book, I refer to lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer, LGBTQ+ rights, and I also use the term queer. In international human rights law, the term sexual orientation and gender identity, SOGI, is used. I also use intersex when specifically referring to cases about the rights of intersex people. Although there are differences between the terms, I use queer and LGBTQ+ pretty much interchangeably. And in the colloquial sense of my community in London, that is, long live queer spaces, I am queer, and queer's in fuck you. The term queer historically carried social stigma, but it is increasingly used to celebrate everyone in the LGBTQ+ community. Bell Hooks, the black feminist scholar, explained it in this way. Queer not as being about who you're having sex with, that can be a dimension of it, but queer as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it and has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. Queer as a struggle against patriarchy, homophobia, racism, and coloniality as interrelated frameworks of oppression. I refer to myself in this book as gay, lesbian, queer, genderqueer, non-binary, trans. To paraphrase Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, I refuse to signify monolithically. For some people, these identities are exclusive, while for others, we move through the world as yet undecided on our gender journeys and exploring the joys of queer liminality. For me, queer is and continues to be the best shorthand way to describe myself and the broader struggle of everyone under the rainbow umbrella. I also use various terms for myself, depending on when the event took place in my life. A note on privacy. I am extremely grateful to those who have given me permission to tell their stories. In some cases, I use real names. In others, the names and certain elements of the story have been changed in order to maintain people's privacy. Prologue. In July 2023, I went home to Ireland for the summer. From Ballycastle, I went to Belfast and took the train down to Dublin. I had lived in Dublin for 3 years as a student, and am called to the bar of Ireland, meaning that I'm a barrister both in England and Wales, where I've mainly practiced, and in the Republic of Ireland. I'm the kind of lawyer that wears a wig and a gown and who goes to court. I was there that time for the weekend, not for work or study, but to act as a tour guide for an American friend who was visiting Ireland for the first time. Despite my years living in Ireland's capital city, to my shame, I had never been to the main tourist attractions. The Guinness Factory, Kilmainham Jail, the National Gallery of Ireland, the list went on. But there's a first time for everything, and I enlisted my friend Luke, a Dubliner, to help me in my task. My first port of call was Trinity College Dublin, founded by Queen Elizabeth I back in 1592, back when Ireland was under British rule. It's where I studied Irish law and French law in a class of 8, out of 120 law students. We were the biggest nerds who wanted not only an education in the common law, but an education that embraces the comparative legal traditions of the civil law too. At Trinity with Luke and my American friend, I headed straight for the Old Library, which holds the Book of Kells, a 9th century gospel manuscript, and the Long Room Library, an impressive two-story vista of rows upon rows of bookshelves. As we walked around the college, I showed my friends some other very important landmarks, such as the Pavilion, where I used to drink cans of cheap cider on Friday evenings before heading to the Palace nightclub, the Burke Library, where I spent most of my 3 years, and my student residence, where I spent time with my first girlfriends, breaking hearts and getting my heart broken. Next, the three of us headed for Merrion Square, where Luke has arranged a private guided tour of Number 1, formerly the childhood home of Oscar Wilde and now a museum. As well as being one of Ireland's most treasured writers, poets and playwrights, Wilde is also one of Trinity's most famous alumni. After leaving Dublin, he became a fabulous celebrity in London, where he lived a flamboyant, champagne-filled lifestyle. Oscar Wilde had been on my mind the last few years as I wrote my book with Jen Robinson on the impact of defamation laws on people's lives. Wilde's libel trial is one of the most famous in English history. Back in 1895, when the trial took place, defamation was a criminal offence. Wilde decided to sue the Marquess of Queensberry for defamation after the aristocrat left a note at the private members' club addressed, "For Oscar Wilde, posing as a sodomite." He spelt this word slightly wrong. As the tour guide told us, although Wilde was married to a woman with whom he had 2 children, he was also having sexual liaisons with young men, including a relationship with the Marquess of Queensberry's son, Lord Alfred Douglas, nicknamed Bosie. Bosie was a poet and also a charlatan, who would persuade Wilde to sue his father, a disastrous course of action. The Marquess instructed Edward Carson QC as his barrister, a formidable lawyer who later became the Attorney General and then the Solicitor General. Born in the same year as Wilde, Wilde and Carson had played together as children in Dublin and became rivals or, according to some, sworn enemies at Trinity College. Carson set out to defend the Marquess of Queensberry by proving that Oscar Wilde was a sodomite. In other words, that the defamatory statement was true, a defence to the libel action. Wilde assured his lawyer, Sir Edward Clarke QC, that there was no truth whatsoever in the allegations that he was a homosexual. But Carson told the court in his opening speech that he would call to the witness stand numerous young men to give evidence about Wilde's sex life. After some days, Sir Edward urged Wilde to withdraw his libel charge against the Marquess. He knew that the prosecution for libel would fail and that Wilde's reputation would be destroyed by the evidence that would be presented. The risk was not simply that losing the libel trial would ruin Wilde's reputation and that he would have to pay expensive legal costs, but that being gay was a crime. In England, gay men were prosecuted under different criminal laws. Henry VIII had criminalised gay sex for the first time under the Buggery Act, 1533. This law carried the potential of a death sentence, and gay men were executed until 1835 under this law. The hostile environment against gay men continued, and 10 years before Wilde's trial, Parliament extended the list of acts that were criminalised with the Criminal Law Amendment Act, 1885. Section 11 of this amendment, also known as the Labouchere Amendment, after the Member of Parliament who proposed it, criminalised gross indecency between consenting men, even in private, and gay men could be prosecuted on the basis of affectionate correspondence. This law meant that it was no longer only anal sex that was criminalised, but broader sex acts between men. The ambiguous wording of the crime of gross indecency meant that the laws were referred to as the Blackmailer's Charter. People were policed on the basis of suspicion and on the basis of their appearance. The scope of the law was impossibly wide, and prosecutors had a much easier time of proving gross indecency than the offence of buggery. In the 1950s, the Wolfenden Committee, which wrote the report recommending the decriminalisation of homosexuality in England and Wales, was set up by the Conservative government due to the authorities' fears that the laws could be used against gay members of the civil service to blackmail them into giving state secrets to the Soviet Union. Decriminalisation of homosexuality was not considered because of an understanding that gay people have equal rights to love and form intimate relationships with whom they choose. The committee's report was good news for gay men, but it led to a travesty of justice for women, with the committee recommending the criminalisation of street prostitution. The Street Offences Act 1959 made it a crime to be a common prostitute, a gender-specific crime, and one that remains today in a different form. Back in April 1895, Wilde was in serious trouble for his actions. 3 days after he withdrew the libel case against his lover's father, a warrant was issued for his arrest, and he was brought before Bow Street's Magistrates' Court to face charges relating to his homosexuality. Wilde was put on trial at the Old Bailey, the Grand Criminal Court in London. Sir Edward Clarke would represent him once again, this time acting for free as a defence lawyer. The trial resulted in a hung jury, meaning that they couldn't reach a verdict, and Wilde had to go through a criminal trial once again. In the second trial, Wilde was convicted of numerous counts of gross indecency and sentenced to 2 years in prison with hard labour in Reading Jail, the harshest imprisonment that the judge could mete out under the law. The trials would later bankrupt Wilde. His prison sentence also broke his heart, as Wilde remained in love with Bosie, but heard from him less and less frequently. We sat in the front room of the museum, 3 queer people, and listened as the guide told us how after Wilde's conviction, he was forced to stand in handcuffs and prison clothes on the train platform at Clapham Junction on his way to Reading Jail. During the 30 minutes in which he waited on the platform, Wilde was subjected to horrific homophobic abuse, jeered at, spat at, under conditions of unspeakable humiliation. Traumatised, Wilde would cry every year on the anniversary of the incident for the rest of his life. Beside me, my 2 friends also shed a tear, sitting in his childhood home. In prison, Wilde's suffering continued. His mother, who he loved deeply, died while he was in prison, and he was unable to attend her funeral. He was taken to the bankruptcy court twice, and according to his writing in De Profundis, his children were removed from his care after it was decided that he was unfit to be with them. A blow so appalling that I did not know what to do. After his release from prison, Wilde did not recover and lived in exile in France. He died penniless and ruined in a bedsit in Paris in 1900. He is often referred to as a gay martyr. There was no redemption for him. After the tour, the 3 of us blinked our way into the Dublin sunshine to wander around Merrion Square, in an Ireland that had repealed the legislation outlawing homosexuality in the 1990s. It is startling that, in only a few decades, Ireland has become a vanguard of LGBTQ+ rights, the first country in the world to hold a referendum in favour of gay marriage in 2015, and one of the first countries to pass a gender recognition law allowing trans people to self-declare their gender. It has even had an openly gay head of government. A very different Ireland to the one in which Wilde grew up, and even where I grew up. It is a real example of how change can happen. There are places where the law that ruined Wilde's life, or versions of it, remain in place. Queer people continue to be blackmailed, arrested, prosecuted, criminalised, humiliated, rejected by their families, persecuted by country and society, and in some cases, faced with the death penalty. The experience of Wilde, prosecuted, subject to humiliation in the press, publicly shamed and incarcerated, is unfortunately not one which is consigned to the history books. Queer people around the world are subject to these human rights violations, simply for loving and being who they are. This book is about the ongoing battle for LGBTQ+ rights, and the right to live our authentic queer lives. It's about how far we have come and how far we have to go, with a focus on the way the law can both oppress us and liberate us from human rights violations. It is about the need to secure a right to authentic queer life, so that we can march, sing, dance, hold hands, kiss, make love, make families, have careers, access the healthcare we need, wear the clothes we want to wear, cut our hair. In short, do all the mundane, everyday things and all the extraordinary, joyful things that make queer life what it is. It is about our right to live our best queer lives, free of state oppression and to love. It is about all the things that wild and so many people have been denied due to state and societal homophobia. It is about the desire for a better and more equitable world. This book is about queer lives, my life, and how the law continues to impact, regulate, and punish lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, and intersex lives. In this book, I set out some of the major battles queer people face around the world today and argue that we must strengthen legal protections. From the battles to protect queer bars and spaces and hold pride marches, to outlawing conversion therapy and overturning laws that criminalise same-sex intimacy and require trans sterilisation, the fight is far from over. This is particularly true when it comes to the rights of trans, intersex, and gender non-conforming people. It is shocking that international and regional human rights courts still deny intersex people the right to identify as such on their birth certificates, or that laws require trans men to be registered as mothers. Often the rules simply don't make sense. They are heterosexual and heterosexist legal fictions. This book outlines the case law, decisions by courts, from around the world to illustrate the different legal problems we continue to have, whether we are simply trying to get on with our lives or trying to enact revolution. In this book, I argue that the law must move from a place of non-discrimination to positive affirmation. I want us to imagine what the world might look like if the law provided us with a right to be here and be queer. I want us to imagine how such a legal affirmation, in our own terms, not in comparison with heterosexuality, might give us a different vision for a queer future. In this book, I want to carry out a queer manifestation. A manifestation for authentic queer lives in law and life. A fabulous, joyous, queer, authentic life. Chapter 1. In Private. In 1998, I was 13 years old and living in Hollywood, Northern Ireland, famous for its maypole and golf. It was the year of the Good Friday Agreement, a treaty that ended the Troubles and brought peace in the North after years of conflict in a territory that sits in the island of Ireland, but politically and legally remains part of the United Kingdom. It was also the year that George Michael was arrested in a Beverly Hills restroom by an undercover police officer. Shortly after his release, he laughed off the incident on a late-night chat show. "I'll show you mine, you show me yours, and then the police officer arrests you." The pop star later released an iconic single, Outside, a camp reenactment of the incident where he dresses up as an LA police officer and dances in front of glittering urinals. I didn't understand why he was arrested and entrapped in this way. My first kiss was with a girl in a treehouse 2 years later. It was the year 2000. I was 15 years old, or perhaps I had just turned 16. She was a popular girl in school, just my type. Smart, blonde, brave and feminine. She dressed like Britney Spears in low-slung ripped jeans and had a belly button piercing. I couldn't tell anybody about my first kiss, so I wrote about it in my diary, in terms that I thought might be cryptic. I'm pretty sure I used some mathematical symbols and Greek characters, even though I'm terrible at maths and certainly didn't speak Greek. I learnt these from my girl crush, who was somehow aware of pi and theta. I didn't write many specific details about my crush. I didn't write about how I wanted to touch her face, her skin, her thighs, and to lie in her bed kissing all night. I didn't write about how I liked to watch her dance, or how I thought she was smarter than me and much more popular. I didn't write about how I would read poetry and think about her. I just wrote down that we kissed in her back garden in a treehouse. It was pitch black outside, and we had stolen some of her mother's cheap New Zealand wine. I had somehow procured a cigarette from somewhere. We talked about the school talent show dance troupe she was leading, and I talked about the Vietnam War, which we were studying in history class together. We talked, and our bodies moved closer together until our lips collided. I knew that I wasn't meant to kiss girls, but I had no idea it would feel so good. It felt so right. I wrote about it in my diary because I couldn't tell anybody. She had a boyfriend, and he was older and nice. Also, nobody would voluntarily talk about being gay. Being gay was a bad thing, an insult. That's so gay. We both knew instinctively that this was our secret. Something that might be normal in a friendship between teenage girls, or something that maybe wasn't so normal. We weren't sure. How would we know? The internet was only just coming into our homes, but there was no social media or search engines to turn to. Girls certainly did not kiss each other in the novels I took out from the school library. It would take another 5 years until I would get my hands on Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. The only information available was in the form of rumours about who was gay in town, and the clear religious dictates on what we should not be doing. No drinking, no getting into cars with boys, no sex, no being gay. Not long after I'd written the entry, my mother found and read my diary. I was asked to come downstairs from my bedroom and taken into the drawing room, the good room, full of aspirations and judgment reserved for special guests and moral interventions. It was meticulously decorated in classic English style. Laura Ashley, floral curtains. It was in this setting that my mother sat me down in such a way that I knew I was in trouble. She questioned me about my crush. I felt deeply ashamed. Perverted. Wrong. Following the extraction of my confession, which wasn't difficult since I had written the facts in my diary itself, I was banned from seeing my girl crush again, in her house or in mine. Sleepovers with her or anyone else were now strictly out of the question. I was completely devastated. On her 18th birthday 3 years later, my mother allowed me to go on the condition that I drive up and back on the same night. I drove through the fog with Celine Dion's version of I Drove All Night on repeat, wild with teenage angst. I ached for years at the loss. It was the first time that I had my heart broken, and it wasn't because a girl broke up with me, but because it was prohibited. It was because in my house, at that time, queer love was, in the words of Bosie's poem to Oscar Wilde, a love that dare not speak its name. I saw her at school, of course, where we would pass each other in corridors, in our regulation uniforms with skirts worn too short. I would even sit beside her in history class, where I could smell her sweet, cheap perfume and would ache to reach out and touch her, even to brush my knee against hers. A few months after my mother's discovery of the kiss, I couldn't stand it anymore. I decided I had to ghost her. I had to cut contact with my best friend, not because I hated her, but because of the exact opposite. I realized this was more than a friendship, that I loved her, or at least I wanted to love a girl, and I wanted a girl to love me back. I didn't even have time to ask her if she had feelings for me. There was no one I could speak to about my heartache. I didn't know anybody who was gay or out. I was so confused. The kiss had felt so beautiful and my feelings felt pure, but I was being told that I was wrong and that it was wrong. Gay people were marginalised, laughed at. Being gay meant being an outcast. Some gay men were visible as hairdressers or Elton John, but I can't recall seeing or hearing about a single lesbian other than it being an insult. I was alone and felt completely helpless and alienated. Late one night, out in my own garden, I destroyed the diary in a symbolic act of immolation. Robbed of my first love, I burnt not only my words, but her letters to me. My poems to her. Birthday cards that said nothing inappropriate, but had her name signed with a heart beside it. a black and white Polaroid of the two of us smiling. It all went up in flames. In an attempt to correct my teenage transgressions, I was sent to a youth group at St. Columkille's Church on Tuesday evenings. On the chapel floor, teenage bodies lay spread out while a semi-modern sound system played Everybody Hurts by REM. My mind has wiped the details of those weekly sessions from my memory. Who led them? Was it the priests? Teenage bodies lying in the round like some die-in protest in the dark. What was the purpose of it all? I lay on the ground and thought about my own hurt. I was terrified about my future. What if the world was going to be a sad and lonely place for me? Would I be able to have a family? Would I be loved? At the time, it hardly seemed strange that I should find myself lying on a church floor. At school, people spoke in tongues. Once, some Canadian young adults came to talk to us about abstinence. They had a paper heart and ripped it into tiny pieces. Adam has sex, heart rips. Then he has sex again, heart rips, until his heart is broken into pieces. The sixth form students giggled nervously. What if Adam were queer, I thought? Would his heart be broken in the same way? But the Canadians did not mention gay sex at all. I consider my mother's reading of my diary, The Privacy Invasion, my first attempt to come out. My mother could not comprehend it. She believed that I was departing from heterosexuality as a form of rebellion. Tall, blonde and intelligent, with sharp blue eyes and her heart full of love, she could only imagine me being safe and happy as a straight person. She wanted me to marry a good boy, to fit into society. She was trying to protect me from a phase. Her way of doing this was devastating for me. Handshaking, she suggested to me that my kiss might have criminal implications. Could a kiss between two girls really be a crime? I watched the George Michael video on TV and didn't understand why he had been arrested. Was it because he was gay? I would later learn that it was never a crime for women to kiss in Northern Ireland, but I didn't know that then, and I'm pretty sure my mother did not know it either. I was terrified. I was under strict surveillance now. My movements closely monitored by my mother, who was equally terrified that her eldest daughter might be a lesbian. I went deep into the closet while I mourned my lost chance at exploring love. My little queer self should have been openly discussing my new crush and the ups and downs of experiencing love for the first time. Instead, I felt despair. I didn't understand, then, the difference between a crime and a sin. Why was it that a kiss between girlfriends was taboo in my house, while my mother happily chatted to my younger sister about her boyfriend? My sister was even allowed to go away with her boyfriend and his family to a caravan in Donegal. Like many young queer teenagers, I decided to keep my desire a secret. I went to house parties. I kissed a few boys to make sure my school friends would not suspect that I liked girls. I wore my hair long. I passed as straight. I even tried to convince myself that I could be straight, though I couldn't manage to fancy any of the boys. I wasn't ready to come out as queer. I didn't know how happy I would become and how much society would change in such a short space of time. I didn't know it then, but journaling love crimes, like I had done as a teenager in Hollywood, was how Jeffrey Dudgeon, a 35-year-old shipping clerk from Belfast, ended up setting one of the most important global legal precedents for LGBTQ+ rights in the 1980s. Gay sex was mainly decriminalised in England and Wales in 1967, but not in Northern Ireland or Scotland, the other parts of the United Kingdom. The different parts of the UK had to battle separately to decriminalise homosexuality, as with more recent battles to decriminalise abortion, which remain ongoing. When Dudgeon was a teenager in 1970s Belfast, about a 15-minute drive from Hollywood, the Troubles were raging. In a bid to prevent decriminalisation extending to Northern Ireland, the Reverend Ian Paisley, imagine a brimstone and fire older version of Trump with a Belfast accent, was running his infamous campaign to save Ulster from sodomy. This would remain a slogan in the 1980s, when I was born, and the Reverend Ian Paisley would remain the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?